any challenge.
Oh man.
Carl?
Yes.
Hey, I'm Mike.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You got scheduled till 4:55.
Okay.
We'll see if there's really like a big line for the next one. Like you got a line right now. It's packing, but
Wow.
yeah, there are people waiting. Depending on that, I'll just like hold up my phone to the red screen and be like, oh,
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it'll go that long.
yeah, just let you know.
Okay. When do I start? Somebody give you.
It is 4:30. You can start as long as you start.
Okay. Ready to go?
As long as your video guys ready, you're good.
All right.
So right about being in my office set that I just took off from office. So now there's like this.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming to my talk about extending Burp. So first, just a little bit about myself. I'm Carl. I've been to every Derbycon, but this is the first one I presented at, so I'm really thankful for the opportunity to do that and talk about something that I'm interested in. I work in product security at Salesforce for my day job, and another thing I'm passionate about is OWASP. I started the Indianapolis OWASP chapter 12 years ago and currently still run it with 3 or 4 other people. Some are in the room, so thanks for coming. So, before we get started, how many of you guys use Burp regularly? Wow, almost everybody. Great. How many of you use extensions in Burp frequently? All right. How many of you have written your own extension?
How many of us have tried?
How many of you have tried and failed? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So today we're going to talk about writing your own extensions. First of all, where you get extensions, a couple different places, and then how you would actually write your own from a high level. And then I have a sample extension that I wrote for this talk that I will do a demo of, and then give you a link to the GitHub repo so you can look at the code yourself and do whatever you want. So today we're going to be living, entirely within the extender tab of Burp. So there's a couple different places you get extensions. First off, first is the BAP store, the Burp App Store. So it has quite a few extensions, and you can see I've got several installed. You get ratings for them, descriptions. There's some that are available only if you have the pro version, the paid version of Burp, but there's quite a few that are free as well. So that's a place you can get those. And if you're really into writing extensions, you can actually get your extensions added to the Burp App Store by contacting Portswigger, and then there's a process for that to do that. So that's one way to get extensions. Another way is to get them from somebody else, maybe from a GitHub repo, or just somebody writes one and gives it to you. So there's a method that you can load extensions that way, which is a screen we're on now. So you can see has some of the same ones from the other screen, but also has the option to add, remove, change the order of them, see the output and the details from the different extensions, and that kind of thing. So if you write your own extension, you can have the output and arrows go here, so you can view it for information or debugging, etc. Let's see. So, if you want to add your own extension, this is where you do it. If you click on the Add button, it gives you this dialog. So you can see here that you have the option of writing your extension in Java, Python, or Ruby. So Java is what Burp is written in, and it's what the interface exposed is. So that's what I wrote my extension is. But you can do Python or Ruby and use Jython or JRuby or a Java version or implementation of those two languages. So this is where you do it. You'd specify the type of the technology, and then select the file, which is just a jar file for Java. For the other two, it's just a regular script, and then add it. And then it gets added as an extension. So now, the third place you can get, or third way to get an extension is to just write your own. So here in the extender tab, you can see that it exposes the API for Burp. So it's Java based. It gives you all the interface files and a way to download them directly from the tool, so you don't have to go to a website or anything like that. It gives you the option to save the Javadoc files off as well. And you can actually see the Javadoc files on the right. And just looking at this gives you an idea of what you can do with an extension. You can interact with any of the built-in tools at the top. You can add UI elements. You can just do various things, pretty much anything you want, and then expose the power that Burp provides you to do. So this is the extension API. What does an extension look like? So this is just a little sample code from the extension that I wrote. So you have a class called Burp Extender, which is in the Burp package. So that's really the only requirement for Burp to be able to find your extension in the package. It has to be called Burp Extender in the package Burp. Other than that, you can implement the code however you like, different packages, different naming, etc. So we're implementing 3 different interfaces here. iBurp Extender, which is the one that tells Burp that this is it implements the functions that an extension needs, like to get callbacks so you can interact with Burp, to register your extension, to tell Burp what type of extension it is and what it's doing. There's scanner checks. You can add your own intruder things, various things like that. Your own editors for requests and responses, just a couple different things. There's iScanner check, which is what we're going to talk about today, which is the scanning interface for extensions. There's do passive and do active scans, and then consolidate duplicate issues. So we'll talk about the do passive and the do active more in detail. Consolidate duplicate issues is just for when you have multiple issues with the same title, it'll consolidate them into one, like you expect in the target tab in Burp. So we're going to talk a little bit about the workflow of what happens. So when you load your extension in Burp, or when Burp loads your extension, it finds that Burp Extender class and calls register extender callback. And what that does is it registers your extension to be a passive scanner or be a scanner and various things. It also gives you access to the helper methods to interact with Burp. But from then on, with passive scans, every time Burp, there's a request or response pair that's eligible to be passive scanned. So for, if you always passive scan or if you do it explicitly, each extension that implements passive scanning will get called, basically, this do passive scan method. So what you do from there is up to you. You have the whole request and the response. You can do whatever you want with it. If you find anything interesting results to you based on what your extension is supposed to do, then you can create issues and return them. And then they show up as regular issues for the site. Or if you don't find anything, you just return nothing and there's no issues. This is just a little snippet of the sample extension that I have that shows what the first part of a passive scan method might look like. So you can see it has the base request response, has methods to get like the URL. You can get the entire response or entire request as a byte array. And then there's also helper methods, for example, to get the body offset. So you can tell where the headers of the request are and where the body is. So you can do various things based on that. Other than that, you just have basically a string that you can, do whatever you want with to find what you're looking for, basically. Active scanning is a little different. Kind of the same thing. When it's loaded, register extender callback is called. So then whenever there's the option to do active scanning, do active scan is called for your extension or for every extension that implements active scanning. And then active is a little different because you get the base request and response. Then you can modify it and call it multiple times, however you want, whatever you're really trying to test, and send the request and get the response. If you have any interesting results that you want to report, you can do that. Very similar to the passive scanning. The only thing that's really different with active scanning, it's a little more fine-tuned because in the active scan settings, you can define or select what you want to scan for. So if you only want to look at query string parameters, for example, you can do that. And then when Burp looks at the request and identifies insertion points in the request where you can insert attacks, it'll only send you those basically. So you can filter it down a little more that way. Whereas in the passive scanning, you just get everything. So this is the snippet for active scan. You see it's the same request response as passive, but you also get the insertion point. Insertion point is the attack vector for the request. So that would be like a query string parameter, form field, cookie, header, various things like that. So for this example, this will make sense when you see the demo too. We're generating a random string of characters. We really don't care what the insertion point type is. So we're replacing the data that's in it, and then we're sending a request and then getting the response. So then we're looking to see what comes back in the response. So that's a typical active scan, and you could do that any number of times. You could recall that, send it again and again and again, as much as you like, to find various things. So that snippet will make sense here in a second. So for this talk, I wrote a demo, scanning extension. I call it Search++. I think it kind of enhances the search a little bit and just does it kind of in a different way for Burp. So it has a passive and an active scanning functionality. In the passive part of it, it finds arbitrary strings in the response header and body. Now, those are strings that you define. You tell it what you're looking for, and it'll save it too. So if you quit Burp and load it again, they're still there. And in every response, it will look for those strings, and then if it sees them, it'll create an issue for the site. So, some example use cases, if you're looking for magic strings or serialized data, maybe if you know data is serialized and the first few bytes always look the same. So if you're looking for vulnerabilities like that, it'll just do it automatically in the background. You don't have to go through Burp search functionality or look through the proxy results. Or if you're looking for certain types of tokens or question marks, maybe there's a new attack that always looks the same. You could put it in here and find it automatically without even really trying from that point on. It also has an active search portion, which basically maps the inputs to outputs, or map an input to outputs on the page. So, lots of applications have maybe one place that data is input, but there could be multiple pages that it is displayed on. So if, for example, like stored cross-site scripting, you may find one place that is input and then displayed, but some other path in the app that you didn't even know about, it's also displayed. So that's not handled correctly there. So if you're doing an assessment, you don't have the source, you could just use this to do that, and also correlate where data is input and output, because a lot of times it seems like developers can't even tell you that. So that's the active part of this extension. So now I have a little demo that I recorded, which will show that. This is just a sample site that I created on my computer and then ran it through Burp in this extension. So we'll play that. So it's just a basic web form where you can input data. So I just use Derbycon, for example. And when you submit, it saves it to a file, but then reports that it saved it. Here you can see the standard request and the response, like you normally would expect. So now you can see that, let me see if I can pause it here. There. So now you can see the Search++ extension. So the passive settings are at the top, the active are at the bottom, and then we'll go from there. So we'll go ahead and add Derbycon is what we want to search for, because we know that we just input it and we know that it's there. So we'll go back to the demo site, and when we hit, it's hard to see, but it's just view results. We saw Derbycon there. Now we go back to Burp. In the target tab, we can see that it found it. It added a finding for it for the site and said where it found it, the URL, highlights it in the response like you'd expect for any other Burp extension or attack. So now we go to back to the proxy and do an active scan on the submit of that form. Let's see, let it run here. So when we go back to the search extension, you can see all the different places it found to input data, and data is the form field for the form. So it inserted that HE string, just that random string, as an attack. So now when you go back and view the results, you can see that through normal functionality, it saved that string. And now that we viewed it through Burp, it's going to show that finding there, that it was found. And at the bottom here, you'll see it shows the URL where the data was inputted through the data field on that URL. And then in the response, it highlights where it was found. So that's how you can map, input to output. So you would do that maybe for a page, and then just kind of run the app normally like you would, and see like kind of what shows up automatically in your results. So that's what that functionality is. So it has a passive and an active scanning functionality both in the same extension. They kind of piggyback off of each other. So that's my demo for the what I wrote just for this talk. Now, a couple of lessons learned that I figured out while doing this. The first one is when you're reporting the results, the findings, you basically return it a list. And each finding has offsets in the request to response where the data is. So that's how it highlights it in the target tab. If you return that list with the findings where the data is not sequential or in order, then Burp doesn't like that and does some bad things. So it's easy to fix. You just need to sort it based on that. But if you don't do it right off the bat, it can cause some headaches. And then the other thing is passive scanning is asynchronous. So if you're exercising the app, you have a passive scanning enabled, it may be far behind where you actually are explicitly doing. So you may think it's not doing anything, which I got bit by that quite a bit. I thought my extension was just broken because it wasn't doing anything, but it was just happening in the background. So I came back later and the results were there. So those are just a couple of things I learned from writing this extension. So with that, I think that's it. I have the URL at the bottom for where you can get the extension code for what I just demoed. And I'd love any comments, feedback, pull requests, whatever. I'll also announce it via Twitter as well. So is there any questions, Adam?
Yeah, other than implementing features for the scanner, what have you found yourself writing extensions for?
That's pretty much all I've done. I know you can do other things. You can add different editor types. You can do different types of intruder attacks and various things. But so far, I've just messed with the extension parts because that's.
You build your own UI.
Yeah, you can add menu items. Yeah, right. Definitely, you can do a lot. So this is just kind of a subset of what you can do here. Yeah.
Do you find writing in one of the particular languages easier?
So I wrote in Java primarily because that's kind of what Burp's written in. I think it's easier.
You seem to like it better in Java native?
I think so. I really haven't written in another language, but it just seems more natural.
Python works fine.
Oh, okay. And you can see too in the Burp App Store, it'll tell what languages are written in too. So there's plenty of extensions written in all three of those. Yeah.
Your plugin, you can only give one search term and it does active and passive for it, or can you give specific terms for passive and specific terms for active?
So you can specify which ones you want to search for passively in the top part in Atom, and it'll always search for those. The active is only you can't really specify. I mean, you could, but it doesn't right now let you specify what it does. It just hits every insertion point on a page and fuzzes it basically. But you certainly could filter out based on what you want to look at or what you don't want to look at. Sure. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks. Oh.
One more question. Have you found the documentation to be good for the more esoteric things that you might want to do in Burp?
Yes and no. I mean, for what I found, it's mainly been good. Just looking at the Java docs, right? But I found, like with everything, looking through GitHub helps. All the extensions that Portswigger wrote and that you can get, they have a GitHub repo that has them in it. So that's very helpful. So that's really been my documentation, using the Java doc and then trying to find an example of what I'm trying to do. So, yeah. All right. Well, thanks.
alter how auto identify.
Right.